Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Q&A with the St. Louis Arc. I'm your host, Sharon Spurlock. I think most of you know me, but I'm going to practice good etiquette and say that I'm a middle-aged woman with dark blonde hair and big chunky reading glasses, and my pronouns are she, her. Very excited today that we're going to be talking about one of the best cultural institutions in our town, the Missouri History Museum, and the efforts they've made to be welcoming and inclusive to our whole community. We have two guests today, Nicole and Hannah. And Hannah, I'm going to start with you. If you could do an introduction about your name and your role at the History Museum.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Ayele. I am the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Coordinator at the Missouri Historical Society. And my pronoun is she, her, hers.
Thank you, Hannah. And Nicole?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole D'Orazio. I am the Director of Exhibitions for the Missouri Historical Society. So I lead the team that develops the exhibits, not just at the History Museum, but at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum as well. My pronouns are also she, her.
Wonderful. It's so nice to have you all here. And it was news to me that you guys were having exhibits at Soldiers Memorial until I went to a recent community partner event. So it's really cool to hear about that. I think I'd like to start, Hannah, with you to talk a little bit about just what your role is in terms of community engagement. How do you look at the different opportunities available at the History Museum through the lens of accessibility, and how do you help make those things come forward?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank St. Louis Arc for giving us this opportunity to present about the Missouri Historical Society accessibility works for people with disabilities in general. And when I come to your question, the Missouri Historical Society has three institutions that comprised of the Missouri History Museum, the Soldiers Military Museum, and also the Library and Research Centers. So we always make sure that all these three institutions are accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities. We make sure with this accessibility by making our exhibits, programs, and other collections in the museum accessible for all. So we work with the community. We partner with different community members, especially with disability organizations and individuals with disabilities, in order to make them involved in our planning stage and during the process of making the exhibit accessible for all. For example, we do have accessibility advisory committee that Nicole will talk more about later, but this committee plays a great role by providing feedback during the exhibit installment or before, and also whenever we have some kind of programs that we need feedback from the committee, they just give us important information how we can make the museum more inclusive for all. And we also work with the community in terms of inviting them to different events, programs, and especially for the access tours that we have for people who are blind and have low vision, as well as for ASL tours for deaf people. So whenever they come to the museum, they give us feedback, what we can make better for them.
I do want to talk to Nicole about the exhibit specifically and how you think through all the different components that will make an exhibit more accessible for people.
Sure. So that process looks a little different for every exhibit, as the needs differ for every exhibit. But there are certain things that have just become standard for us no matter what. For example, anytime we have a video with any sort of audio, that audio is automatically going to be open captioning. When we are able to, which is not, unfortunately, this isn't feasible with every exhibit, but when we are able to, we also like to transcribe those into an ASL component as well. We partner with Deaf Inc. on that to have a ASL interpretation done of the video. Normally you can access that via a QR code and then watch it on your device. But we are hoping to get to the point where we have the amount of time to actually have it be a picture-in-picture scenario in the exhibit itself. That is our end game on that, that we would like to get to. We always supply Braille and large print documents at our guest services desk to be checked out. And we always offer a map at the entrance of an exhibit that highlights where different accessibility items can be located. And throughout the years that map has evolved. So current ones that are up tend to be tactile. So you can feel the floor plan of the gallery. It includes Braille. One in our newest exhibit, Soccer City, it even includes a QR code to audio description of the exhibit. In that scenario, it's one QR code for the whole exhibit because it's a rather small space. But audio description is also something we try to include in every exhibit we do. And in larger ones, those tend to be in like 3 different stations throughout the exhibit so that you're not dealing with such a large file. Sometimes those are in a kiosk with a listening wand, and sometimes those are QR code based, or sometimes both. It just depends on the needs of the exhibit. We also try to include a variety of different types of touchables throughout the space, depending on, again, what the exhibit is about. So again, in Soccer City, we have a touchable image, a raised image of the St. Louis City SC logo with some Braille text that talks about what the different parts of the logo represent. So what represents the 2 rivers and the arch and those sorts of things. We've also done touchables that are fabric samples or material samples, those sorts of things. So those are the things that we tend to keep as in our standard playbook of accessible features, but we're always trying to expand that as our project scopes and budgets allow us to, for our temporary shows, especially. As we work on larger, more long-term projects, we're looking to increase those a lot.
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating process. When I was on the committee for the ADA exhibit, you had created little models for the advisory committee member who was blind, who could walk through what the exhibit would look like with her fingers and give feedback about it. And it was something I'd never really thought about, but it was really neat to see all those pieces come into play. And I think some of our families have anxiety about taking family members, particularly people that have sensory issues or problems maintaining boundaries or sitting still, taking them to community cultural locations because they're afraid they're not going to behave the right way. And can you share, like when I went to the coloring exhibit, I thought that was just such a cool way to have an interactive experience where it felt very welcoming to anybody to come in. Can you talk about what you expect of guests that might have some of those kind of needs and how you might support them?
We have for people with developmental disabilities and other type of disabilities, we have different accessibility features or tours that we make them involve in our museum. For example, we have sensory or nursing rooms in our 3 locations. So these nursery or sensory rooms helps the visitors to have private space for nurturing, or serving as a calming space for visitors who especially feel overwhelmed in the museum. As you know, sometimes museums might be overwhelmed because of they are crowded or they might be noisy sometimes. So we prepared these nursery or sensory rooms for those people who are in need of. And these nursery rooms have interactive gadgets or tools like noise cancellation headphones, weighted blankets, beans bags for lodging children books, and also bubble lamps. We also provide sensory kits for those youth and adults who have sensory needs, and these sensory kits helps our visitors to have the best experience without being overwhelmed or distracted with the surrounding noise. For example, we provide them with noise cancellation headphones, anti-glare glasses, and fidget toys. So those kind of kits helps the adults and youth with developmental disabilities to enjoy the museum as anyone else. And the other thing that we do in our museum is organizing access tours. These access tours include audio description for people who are blind and ASL tours for deaf people. So these tours occurs every quarter for 45 minutes. We select exhibits. For example, it might be coloring STL, it might be soccer exhibit, which is already opened last week. So after we select these exhibits, we promote the access tours for different disability organizations to share for their clients. And based on that, when they come, there are trained tour guides, staff, or volunteers who provide the audio description or ASL tours, so that the people can be engaged in our museum.
Cool. I think those are so many really, really important things. We do have a couple questions. One question is that whether you offer a sensory-friendly night or morning for individuals that might need a little more freedom to run around, or maybe don't need to have some of the lights lowered or the sounds off in the building.
So far, we don't have sensory morning or sensory days, but that's one of our plan in the future. We start to figure out like what will be the best way in our museum to accommodate or have those kind of sensory mornings or day in our museum. So that we don't have so far, but that's our near future plan.
Fantastic. So I love this other question, and I'm not sure who would prefer to answer it, maybe both of you, but the guest asked, where does the push for accessibility even come from? Is it a federal requirement for all museums?
There are certain things that are federally mandated, but MHS makes a strong point to take it far beyond that. For example, in terms of exhibits, there are guidelines about how wide paths need to be in order to accommodate wheelchairs. Those types of things are federally regulated. I believe that the regulation is 3 feet. We always aim to do 4 feet or larger. And that's kind of our approach to everything, is to meet the expectation and then to always exceed that. We do have a large number of people on our staff who just hold accessibility dear to their hearts, and the desire to make sure that our institution is as welcoming and accessible to everybody in our community is a really strong driving force, whether it is with exhibits, whether it is with programs, whether it is with our buildings. So for example, I believe, though I wasn't involved in it, I do believe there were a lot of strong pushes with the renovation of Soldiers Memorial to make sure that that building was far more accessible when it reopened in 2018.
but we also did evaluation for our exhibits and other programs by Paraquat in 2017. So that's the major thing that the museum is pushed to have accessibility as a priority in the museum, because they suggested different things that we didn't accommodate or we didn't include in the museum to make inclusive and accessible for people with disabilities, starting from the physical environment, the exhibit galleries, and as well as the programs. So that made us to think about like what we should do in order to make better accessible in our museums.
That makes total sense. And honestly, I think the more deep your relationships are within the disability community, the more that you recognize the need and want to honor that need. And I really value that. Let me switch gears then to talk about brand new exhibits. As part of your process, when you're imagining what the next exhibit's going to be, how do you draw in the disability community? What are some of the questions that you ask yourselves in the planning process, Nicole?
Sure. So it may come as a shock to many, but it actually takes us 4 years to develop an exhibit from initial conception to the day it opens. And about half of that time is focused on figuring out what the story is and what objects may go on display. And the other half of that time is on the physical space. A lot of times, the person leading content development, who we call a content lead, they may come with a certain list of interactives or accessibility features that they want to have, but a lot of the early development will happen between the designer of the exhibit and that content lead as they work through the space. And they really work through that menu of objects that I listed before: audio description, touchables, ASL interpretation, the things that we kind of hold in our pocket as go-tos every time. But then we always take our preliminary plans to the external advisory committee that Hannah gathers. And we share those ideas with the group and we gather feedback. And sometimes we are able to incorporate a lot of that feedback, and sometimes we are able to incorporate a little bit of it, just depending on the circumstances of each project, which are very different. And in addition to that, while the exhibit is open, we invite that same group of people to come back and experience the physical space in a way that they couldn't when it was on paper or in a model. And then, you know, the feedback that we get from those walkthroughs are incredibly helpful, because that's information that we then use to help inform the next project or the next 2 or 3 projects that we're working on. So we're not able to make physical changes to the space that they're touring that day, but we are able to take that information and help it inform future projects.
I don't know if either one of you can speak to your special events, but I'm thinking about like Thursday night at the museums. Are those things that you, Hannah, think about through the lens of diversity and equity and think about how it's going to welcome people to the space?
Yes, not only the Thursday nights, but also other programs and events that we have in the museum. We always try to make them accessible and inclusive of diverse groups. So the programs and events, for example, every quarter, at least one program or events should have ASL interpretation, and so that deaf people can participate as well. And if there is a need to have audio description of an event, we can also provide that services based on request. So the other thing is for people with developmental disabilities, like the K-12 education programs or the History Exploration Day, when our visitors come, staff make sure that they welcome people with developmental disabilities with a smile, or they chat with them, or they prepare short attention span programs, not, to make them relax and comfortable as much as possible, or they may provide them accessible seatings, to make them comfortable as well. And they mostly do a program with our visitors, like to make them engage so that they are not feel uncomfortable. So every programs, whenever ASL is required or any other accommodation is requested, we try to provide those needs.
Yeah, as you've been talking, I've thought about the exhibits at the History Museum, and I think for many people, but especially for people with cognitive disabilities, that modality of learning is so important. And if I'm a community member that has not walked through the door of the History Museum the last 5 years, 6 years, and I'm supporting somebody who has a cognitive disability, like what would they experience in an exhibit? How would somebody that that needs maybe a smaller bite of information or a multi-educational approach, what would they find in the coloring or the soccer exhibit that would engage them?
Sure. So some of the other interdisciplinary aspects that we put into these exhibits range in both low tech and high tech learning opportunities. We offer things like flip books that give visitors the opportunity to either dive deeper into a subject or to only dive into that portion of a subject, depending on, of course, which their preference is. And it's a very tactile experience there. We offer interactives such as listening stations or quizzes, games, other low-tech types of interactives, such as our Mighty Mississippi exhibit, which opened in 2019. We had a real paddle wheel that you could turn and experience what it would have been like to steer a paddle boat. And it had the proper torque to it to show how difficult that would have been. It wasn't just something you could spin around a lot, or like in that same exhibit, we had a map of Cahokia Mounds and you could explore the different sites. So
I think those are such great examples, because honestly, I think all of us really benefit from those kind of experiences at a museum. And I've learned over time that I enjoy it more if I go in and enjoy a smaller bite more often. So I think people should go all the time over to the museum and just do as much as feels comfortable and enjoyable.
Yeah, and you mentioned the coloring exhibit. I mean, if all you do is color in Coloring STL, I mean, you learn a lot about architecture in this city without ever reading a label, just through the act of coloring.
Yeah, I love that exhibit, and there you're going to recognize some buildings. You're going to see the old arena or one of the pavilions in Tower Grove or some other building that makes you get excited. So everybody, I hope you're listening and you're going to commit to getting out and going to the History Museum. We've got a question about whether you've done a History of Disability in St. Louis exhibit yet.
I was not here back during the ADA exhibit, Sharon, that you helped with. So I'm not sure what entirely the focus of that was. I know it was in 2010, and I know it was to help celebrate the anniversary of the ADA. Did it take a St. Louis focus?
I will just say every exhibit at the History Museum really relies on our local history as part of the foundational part. Let me be one of the speakers for a minute and just say, you guys are amazingly good at curating information. And this might be an opportunity for me to say to our community, if you've got something that you've had for a long period of time that reflects on the history of disability in St. Louis, your stuff could be something that is kept in the archives at the History Museum for researchers and may eventually be something that ends up in an exhibit. But, you know, that exhibit for the ADA included information about the founding of Paraquat and the Starkloffs and other events that occurred here that were really significant, along with many other kinds of more national significant events. So, but I do think that the curation process is really cool at the History Museum to know that something of yours could be of real value to show people what it was like for a person with a disability even 25 years ago. That is going to be history one day. It's already history. We're coming to the end of our time, but what I think I'd like to do is, Hannah and Nicole, let each of you have one more opportunity to share something I didn't ask you about, or you know, just give one more piece of information that you want our community to know about related to the History Museum and accessibility. So, Hannah, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. What I want to mention is about we all talked about how accessible the museum is, but we really encourage people with disabilities to come to the museum and enjoy and give us especially feedback how we can improve our museum better in the future. So that would be very important for us because we try our best to include every accessibility features, but there might be some community members who are not included in our museum. So I really encourage people with disabilities in general to come and have experience and give us feedback to improve for the future.
I wholeheartedly second that. I mean, we hope that others feel that we're doing a great job, but we always know that we can do better. And there's no better way for us to learn that than through hearing firsthand accounts of how one of our best efforts maybe wasn't quite good enough. And you know, part of being accessible is just being welcoming and making sure that everybody feels like they have a place here. And you had asked a question about expectations for visitors. We just expect that you'll come and enjoy history and have a wonderful time here. And if that expectation is met, then we have wholeheartedly done our job every day.
All right, there it is, everybody. It's been put out to you. Please go and see what is available to you, not just at the History Museum, but all of the wonderful cultural institutions in St. Louis are very welcoming. I do want to give a shout out to the History Museum's information desk staff, because they are always super accommodating when I go. If I have questions about, you know, family restroom or sensory room, or you know, just even being able to access some of the equipment that Hannah talked about, they are very knowledgeable and very kind and ready to help you, because they really do want you to have a great time. So thank you both for coming today. This was really a fun conversation. I'm such a fan, and I'm really glad that we have, you know, so many great institutions in our city, and they're free, people. You know how I feel about this. Go out and use them. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.